Okay, so in this exercise, we're going to do some stitching practice. And I have about 6 pages here in the little pattern booklet for you to practice. And the reason they're on paper, we're not going to cut anything out of fabric. It's all going to be stitched on the paper. And this is so that we don't waste any fabric while we're just beginning to learn the machine. And these exercises are actually to help you get used to your machine and learn how it works. So I have some straight lines. I have lines with runs in them. That's what we'll call that. And then I have a concentric rectangle. There are wavy lines. There are pivot corner points and angles. And then we have a spiral line. So there's just one little housekeeping issue that you will actually see in the sewing videos. And on these forms now, it says level 1. But on the paper that I'm actually sewing on, it actually says volume 1. So I actually did those videos before I changed all of the titles to levels. So it's exactly the same exercises, it just has a different title. So yours should say level 1. So again, we're just going to stitch on this paper, and we're going to stitch half of it without having the machine threaded, and then we're going to stitch the other half with threaded, and that will happen for each of these paper exercises. So I know that these can be kind of long and exhausting exercises, but really if you can get through all of these, you will be really ready for all of the other exercises that are going to be coming to you in this level. So let's go ahead and go over to the machine. Okay, so we're ready to work on our lines on paper, and I have all of the exercises here. I've got straight lines, I've got the straight runs, we're going to pivot and cross over. Then I have this concentric square, we're going to pivot and we're going to continue to sew in until we get to the middle. Then I have some wavy lines. Then I have the lines, the angled lines with pivot points. And then to end it, I have a semi-concentric circle motions. So what these will help you understand and feel is how things will be moving through the machine. So this will be able to help you to understand how fast the machine can go and how slow it can go, and how you can practice that, because we're going to do this on paper so we don't waste any fabric or any thread. Now we're actually going to do half of these without any thread in the machine, and then we're going to thread the machine and we're going to do the other half of it with thread. So you're going to have little holes in here because of your needle is going to be poking through, but you're going to actually be able to feel how the paper moves through the machine without actually destroying any fabric. So I'm just going to get started here. I'm going to start with the straight lines. Lift the presser foot and make sure your paper is underneath. Let's start right here. And what you're going to do is that you're just going to guide this line right into the middle of that foot. And if you can guide it just between the two arms or legs of the foot, that's your goal. Now I'm going to actually sew, and you'll see how it works. Okay, now don't keep your fingers as close to the foot that I do, but just you want to kind of feel how the paper is going to move through. It looks like I'm actually holding the paper down, but actually I just have my hand resting right on top of it, right? Because we just want to guide that fabric through. If you hold the fabric from moving through the machine, you're just going to get one big hole. And we want the fabric to actually be pulled through by those feed dogs. Let's go ahead and try this out. Now that's pretty slow. If I want to try to go faster, this is a good time to practice, right? And then I can lift that needle up in. And I don't know if you can see that, maybe you you can. The little tiny holes that are right here, that's what we're looking for. So I'm going to do half of this, and then I'm going to go on to the next piece of paper. Now understand, again, you're not holding the paper from moving through the machine. You're just laying your hands lightly on the paper so that you can keep it guided going through the middle of that foot. All right, so now we have our concentric square. What we're gonna do is we'll start here, we'll go to this point, pivot, come down, pivot again, go back up, and notice we're not coming back to our original spot. We're actually going to stop a little ways away from that, about a ½ inch, and then pivot, and then we will continue making this rectangle square as we sew, never removing the paper from the machine. However, I'm only going to sew probably to about the third. I'm going to finish this third line in, and when we come back to this spot, we're going to stop, and then I'm going to fill the rest of this in after I've threaded the machine. So let's start here at the beginning of the line and sew. And turn that wheel to get right onto that line, and then continue sewing. So I'm going to stop right here. And I'm going to save the rest of these lines for when I have them machine threaded. Okay, so now I have the wavy lines. I'm ready to do that. And what this is going to help you to learn is how to just lightly move the paper through. And this will be the same for when you work with fabric. You're just going to lightly guide it through. And again, right here in the middle of this presser foot, that is where you want to be guiding these lines into, because this is where the needle needs to go in. So I'm going to start up here with this outside line right here, and it's going to be a quick turn as I start. So hold on to your paper and make sure that you're going to be doing this turning motion as you go into where the needle is. Now this will help you practice how to control the speed of the machine as you sew. All right, so there was the first line. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to do about 3 or 4 more lines, and then we'll save the rest for thread. All right, I've done about half of them. I'm going to save the other half for the thread. Okay, so now I have these angled lines with a lot of different pivot points, and this is going to help you to practice to stop right on those points and then pivot back in a different angle. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to work from this corner. I'm going to go up to about, maybe I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe just these 4 lines without thread, and then the remainder I'll do with thread. So this will just give me some practice from the bottom through to the middle without the thread. All right, let's start with this little tiny one right here. Get this angled in the machine. You will have to slow up. You can't hit it right on. And what you're going to do is turn the hand wheel to get that needle in, and then pivot to go another angle. right? That was pretty easy. Now this other one. All right, so that was good practice. I'm going to save these other lines that are left for thread. Okay, so now I have this spiral that goes into a very tight spiral here in the middle. So we're going to see how close we can get to that. Now it looks like we have a lot of lines, but actually if we look at the very beginning down here, I only have 3 lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do the outside line without thread, and then I'm going to save the 2 other lines for with thread. So I'm just going to give myself one practice, because once we get in here we won't be able to see. We'll have to actually change our stitch length a little bit. And I have another exercise coming up with that. But again, we're starting with a larger stitch. Remember, it should be at a 2.5 or a 3 on your machine. But I'm going to do the outside here, the outside line, without any thread. Because once we get to the tighter areas up here, we're going to have to change our stitch length to go a little bit smaller. But I don't want to have to go too small without thread, because that will just create holes in the fabric. So I'm going to start on the outside of this curve with my original stitch length. Again, it should be at 2.5 or 3. I have my machine set out right now at 2.5. So I'm going to start with the outside line here. And you're going to have to go slow at the beginning, or really slow as you go all the way around, because you're constantly turning the paper. You're not holding it down, but you're guiding the paper into the dotted lines right into the middle of that presser foot where the needle is hitting it. So you're just going to be guiding it, and you're going to be giving it a turning motion like this. As you get more comfortable with the turning, with the eye-hand coordination, you can try to go a little bit faster on your machine. This is a great exercise to practice your controlling the speed of the machine with your foot as you're using your hands to turn the paper using your eye, watching where your stitch line is going. And look, I'm getting really confident here. I'm going really fast, but I'm going to slow down a little bit. I'm going to stop right about here, and I'm actually going to turn my stitch dial down just maybe a couple of clicks to a 2. That will give me shorter stitch lengths to hopefully get a little bit in here a little bit easier with the titer, because smaller stitch lengths give you a little bit more time to actually create that curve. I'm going to stop about here, and I'm coming up pretty close to the end of this line, but I'm just going to lift the presser foot a little bit. I could have done this a little bit earlier, but I thought I was getting those stitches in there. Okay, I'm just going to reset my paper a little bit so I can see that line going in between the two legs or arms of that presser foot. And then I will sew again. I might have to do that one more time just to get to the end with a couple more stitches. All right, and that ends out our first stitch line. And I'm not sure if you can see that, but I will move this around. The holes are just about right on top of the printed dotted lines all the way around. It looks pretty good. Spiraling, and you can see that here is the end of that right there. So the two other lines, what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread up the machine, and I'm going to start sewing on with thread. All right, so we've practiced sewing without thread, and now we're going to practice sewing with thread. It will feel a little bit different, but again, this is going to help you learn what it feels like when you've got thread in the machine, pulling it through the machine. So I'm going to be using red thread, and I'm going to be using red thread for all of the samples so you can actually really see where my stitches are. Now I'm also setting my machine for these exercises at number 3 on the sewing machine. So that's number 3 on the stitch dial, and that's so the stitches are going to be a little bit longer so that they don't rip holes in the paper. All right, so lift the presser foot, found the spot where you left off, presser foot down, and I like to turn the needle into the paper first before I start. And then, just like we did before, we're going to sew. And again, you're going to guide your dotted line here right in the middle of your presser foot. And we're going to stop at the end of that line. I'm going to give it one more stitch. Needles all the way in. Now, because this is paper and it will rip pretty quickly, when you turn to take your needle out, make sure that the needle goes all the way up, and that your take-up lever is all the way up in the top position. If you don't remember what the take-up lever is, just review the machine orientation video, right? Once everything is in the top position, then you can lift the presser foot all the way, and what that does is it opens up your tension discs, and you should be able to gently pull the paper out without ripping it. And I've got my snips nearby, and I'm just going to snip on the top and the underside. All right, and also as you go along, you may want to go ahead and clip your starting point as well. It's a good idea to get in this habit so that you don't have to spend time at the end of your sewing to do all of the clipping. All right, so that was pretty successful. If you can see here, this is my stitched line here in red, and I stayed pretty close to the dotted line. So now let's finish it out. Let's practice some more lines. All right, so now all of our stitching lines are done, and we have half of it without, and then we have the other half with the thread. So if your project looks like this, perfect. You're ready to move on to the next one. All right, so now we're ready to stitch with thread on our straight lines with runs. Remember, we're going to run over to the next line. So I'm going to look here. I'm going to find out where I left off, and it looks like I left off right here. So this is where I'm going to start. right there. And just like the straight lines, we're going to put the needle down first, and then we're going to stitch, but we're not going to remove the paper from the machine. So stitch down, and then slow up as you start getting to that pivot point, and the needle goes right into it. Lift the presser foot, pivot toward that next line, stitch over, and it looks like I'm going to have to hand turn this one. The needle goes right into that pivot point and pivot in the direction of the next line. And now we're going to complete this sew by repeating that same process for the remainder of the lines. Now that we've come to the end, I'm going to bring the needle all the way up to the top, make sure my take-up lever is at the top, press our foot all the way up, and then I can remove the paper. And I'm going to clip here at the end, clip my threads on both the sides, and then I'm just going to clip where I started. And so now that is our parallel line runs, half with no thread and the other half with thread. If you're looking this good, awesome. You're ready to move on to the next one. All right, we're ready to work on the concentric square here for our stitching practice on paper. Remember, we're just going to be pivoting and around the square shape, and I'm going to find where I left off, and it looks like I left off right here, so that's where I'm going to start with my thread. So let's just get this in the machine. Properly needle down, and we can sew. And we're coming up to that first pivot point. Looks like the needle may just be a little bit over. If your needle's going to be a little bit over at this point, you can lift the presser foot up a little bit and just move it right back on top of where that line would be. Lower the presser foot and put the needle in all the way down. Then lift up the presser foot again and pivot. Alright, so now that we're at the end, we've come to the center of our square. We're going to bring the needle all the way back up. Make sure that your take-up lever is all the way up. Lift the presser foot all the way up, and then remove the paper. If your paper doesn't pull out without ripping it, it should pull out really smoothly. Just double check that you've got your take-up lever all the way up. And I'm just going to clip my ending threads here. And then also where I began. Alright, so our outside part of the square is without thread, and then the rest of the inside is with thread. If you've got it looking this good, you're ready to go to the next one. Alright, so we're ready to continue with our wavy lines. Half of it has no thread, and I'm actually going to finish the other half of it with thread. So let's see how this one feels. This is the one I left off at, so I'm going to start way over here on the longest line. And remember, you're just going to be guiding the fabric, guiding the dotted lines into the middle of your presser foot. So you will have to slightly turn the paper as you go, and just try to sew slow. Getting that stitch line lined up right in between the presser foot legs. And here we are at the end. I'll take one more stitch, bring that needle all the way up, make sure that the take-up lever is all the way up, presser foot all the way up, then you can pull your paper out. Clip your threads. All right. There we go. There's our first wavy line. So let's go ahead and finish the rest of them. All right, now here is our wavy lines, half of it without thread and half of it with thread. If your stitching is looking like this, you are on the right path. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so here we have our angled lines with pivots. Half of this was done without thread. We're actually going to do the thread part now. So this was the last line that we did, so I'm going to start with this next one. And it's probably the longest line on here. And remember, we're going to sew in a direction, and then we're going to stop right at the point, put the needle down, and pivot, and move the paper in the direction of the next sew line. So let's get started with this one here in the middle. I'll walk you through this first one. Sew up to this point. If you don't think you're going to hit the point perfectly, go ahead and turn the needle, see where it's going to hit, and if you need to move the paper, just lift up the presser foot just slightly, and then you can put the needle down, let the presser foot go, needle all the way down, then you can lift the presser foot again and pivot to that angle. And we're going to do that for the rest of the line. Let's see if that's going to hit. I may want to go just a little bit further. There we go. Let's see where we are. Maybe 2 more stitches. This one looks good. Pivot. See where that looks good. And we can finish this line out. And I'll give it 1 more stitch. Needle all the way up. Take up lever all the way up. Presser foot all the way up. And clip your threads. And I'm going to do that for the beginning and the end for every stitch line. All right, there are our angled lines with pivot points. We're doing so good here. All right, let's move on to the last one. All right, so here's our curved spiral, and if you remember, we did the outside line without thread, and now we're going to do the last two inside lines with thread. So we're gonna see how that feels a little bit different. So we're gonna start here. Again, I have my dial set on 3, my stitch length dial set on 3, and I'll just start here, right at the end, and we'll spiral in toward the center. Just take your time and go slow. Make sure that your dotted line here is going right in between the two legs of your foot. Now right about here is when it starts getting a little challenging. So I'm going to lift my presser foot a little, and I'm just going to turn the paper a little bit just so I get that line, the dotted lines lined back up in the middle of the presser foot. I'm having to turn the paper faster now. Okay. So I'm going to put the needle down, and it's getting really tight around here. We're almost there. I'm going to dial my stitch length down 2 notches, down to the 2.5, and then I'll lift the presser foot. I'm just going to realign that line just really quickly, and then I can continue to sew. And whenever you feel like the line is getting kind of out of place, go ahead and put the needle down, lift the presser foot, and just adjust that line just a little bit to get back into the curve. And I'm going very slow right now. I'm going to have to realign right here. One more time. Another time. I'm going to, right, and I'm just going to do 2 more stitches, and now I can take it out. I'm going to trim these threads, and we'll have a look at that really quickly before I do the last line. I'm going to clip these threads really quick. Alright, so let's look at here. So it actually looks pretty good. There's a couple of jumpy places, and that's where we kind of corrected. When we want to correct for that curve, we just want to do it ever so slightly. But if you look at my stitch line, it's literally almost right on top of that dotted line. All right, let's do this last line. And remember, I dialed down to 2.5, so I'm going to dial back up to my 3. That's where I want to start. I'm actually going pretty fast, and watch my hand back here. I'm constantly turning this paper. I'm not holding it from sewing. I'm actually just constantly turning front the back on the back side. And then I'm turning into, I'm kind of testing myself here. And I'm going to stop and realign a little bit. And then I'll start stitching again. Watch that needle in, and I want to realign a little bit. We're so close to the end. I'm going really slow so I can turn. My turns are getting out of control, so I'm going to dial down to 2.5 on my stitch length, and then I'm going to try to go slow and turn, and I'm going to have to realign here. And then I'm going to have to realign for the last little bit. All right. Trim all your threads off. And here we are. So I've got those two spiraling lines in thread and the outside one without thread. If your samples are looking like this, you're pretty good, in pretty good shape. We can actually talk a little bit more about this in assessment. Okay, so let's have a look at these lines on paper. So remember, so these exercises were for your benefit so that you don't have to use a lot of fabric in a lot of your practicing. So we did half and half, half without thread and then half with thread. And what you should be looking for when you're looking through these is, of course, how you remained on top of those stitch lines that I made, and that your stitching, of course, is really accurate and consistent. So I'm going to turn this over. We can actually see a little bit better on the opposite side without the distraction of the dotted lines. See how straight and consistent the stitching is for the thread and also on the non-threaded side. So we had 6 pages of these. If you got through all of these, congratulations. I know it was kind of a lengthy exercise to have to do this. But what you're going to be looking for, if some of your stitching you had a hard time controlling where your pivot points were on, for instance, this concentric rectangle, you may want to go ahead and print another one of these out and try it over again. That's before you go to the fabric, because you don't want to be wasting fabric unless you have a lot of fabric to be wasted. So, and then of course we have the wavy lines. This one was kind of fun. So again, you're going to look at how easy and how quickly you turned your paper on these wavy lines. And then of course we practice pivoting here on this one. Did you match all your pivot points pretty good without a stitch coming over across? We really want these to be pointy. So it looks like we did a pretty good job here of getting really nice pointed pivot points. So the last one that was probably the most challenging was probably this spiral line. And I know it got a little bit challenging right here in about this area. Let's go ahead and turn this over so we can see. There's a little bit choppiness, so we may want to just work on this a little bit. So if you feel that you are ready to go to fabric, guess what? You're going to get to do a concentric square and also more of the spiraling lines. So we have some other fabric exercises we're going to do on this type of stitching. But if you feel that these are actually pretty good and you like how they look, they're all ready to go into your notebook. They're just a couple of things that you'll want to do for each page. You're going to want to actually put your name on it and put the date. And I haven't labeled this, so this would actually be labeled lines on paper. So this is how I would label these. I might actually just put right under the top here, lines on paper, and then put my name up here at the top, and then put the date over here. But of course, you can label these however you would like. And I would actually just put this on all 6 of the pages. All right, so let's go ahead and put these into the notebook.